So, another important topic in marriage, the door closed.
Yes.
I'm going to be talking about another S word. Okay? I think there's some younger folks in here, but I think you guys are old enough to hear this. We're going to be talking about sex. Okay, I said it. A lot of times in Christian settings, it's very uncomfortable to talk about sex, but there's no reason for us to be ashamed of talking about it, because after all, who invented sex?
God did.
God did, right? Okay, so in fact, sex is one of the very first things that the Bible talks about, and God really gave us the gift of sex for our benefit. And there's two main purposes of sex. Okay, one is what? Reproduction. Great children. Very good. And two, what do you think the second main purpose is? Intimacy. What did we read in Genesis? Is the purpose of marriage? One flesh. That's right. And so sex is part of that fulfillment of that. Let's first talk about children. God could have created human beings to have children without sex. There are animals that do that, right?
Yeah.
What are they called?
Asexual.
Okay, asexual.
Chicken.
No.
Eggs.
No.
No. There's some creatures, they just reproduce on their own, right?
Oh, yeah.
So God could have created human beings to do that, right? There's no real reason why he couldn't have. But he did it, I think, because it's such an awesome thing for a new human being to be created from an act of love. Isn't that an awesome thing to think about? That because two people love each other, out comes a whole new human being. God could have just brought babies in a stork, right? You guys know that's not how babies are born, right? Okay. Babies are born because two people love each other. And so out of this biblical command to love and to become one flesh, we get a whole new human being that didn't exist before those two people loved each other. I think that's just such an awesome thing. Instead of babies just being popped out from somewhere, or just one person deciding wanting to have a baby, it takes two people to love each other and consummate that love for this new, completely unique creature to exist. I just read a Time magazine article last week that more and more people are deciding not to have children at all. I can understand delaying children because of career. That happens a lot. But more and more people are saying that they don't need children, that they feel fulfilled without children, that they can better use their money in other ways. They just think children are too expensive. To me, that is just really sad. If they really don't want children, maybe that's better for their non-existent child, because they probably would have been bad parents anyways, right? But to me, it's just sad, because one of my greatest joys in life is being a parent. Now the second reason for God giving us the gift of sex is to unite us as one flesh. What is the full technical term for sex? That's just an abbreviation, What does it stand for? Sex stands for sexual intercourse. Okay? it's just a little cumbersome to say, right? So we abbreviate it. What does intercourse mean? Intercourse just means some kind of a relationship, like a two-way relationship. So you can have like economic intercourse between two countries, okay? And you'll use that term in other contexts. It's not just for sex. Intercourse means to have like a relationship between two parties. And so sexual intercourse is just one form of a relationship. I want to read one passage that I got from an Orthodox website. These words of St. Paul, read at the sacramental celebration of marriage in the church, contain the whole program for spiritual life in the community of marriage. The husband must love his wife to the point of death, as Christ loved the church. And the wife must be totally given to her husband in everything as the church is given to Christ. The union in love must be perfect, total, complete, enduring, and lasting forever. And within this union, the sexual act of love is the mystical seal of the total union in love, the act whereby the two are united in mind, heart, soul, and body in the Lord. So in the act of sex, you have a mystical union between two people, where they become not only one flesh, but they are united spiritually too. Because did you know that in older translations of the Bible, what's another word used for sex? What's that?
Uncovering.
Okay, I guess that's kind of a euphemism. What's another term? It's the word to know. As a knowledge. Okay. Even in legal statutes, you still come across the word carnal knowledge. That means to have sex with someone. So, sex is a form of knowing someone. Isn't that interesting? That's the terminology we used to use. It's kind of an outdated term, but I still love that concept that sex is another way for a man and a woman to get to know each other. It's part of that uniting of one flesh and one mind and one heart and one soul. Unfortunately, we don't think about this mystical union, this spiritual union of sex anymore, because our society has really abused sex. Instead of having sex being for the purpose of having children and uniting two people, we have a hookup culture where sex is all about personal pleasure, all about fun. It's a form of entertainment and amusement, just like we're talking about how so many people live for fun. Well, sex is just one way of doing that, of satisfying your own physical desires. Why do you think God wants us to reserve sex for marriage? Why do you think?
It's just to protect us.
Yeah, that's good. One reason is to protect us. And what do you mean by that?
Because if you have sex outside of marriage and if a baby occurs, then that's
So there's physical reasons, yeah. You don't want to have children out of wedlock before you're ready to be a parent. It's also protection health-wise, right? You can get a lot of diseases and things. What else? Well, if sex is for the purpose of uniting two people, then if you're not married to the person, you're not really united, are you? And so you're kind of taking that out of that purpose. But part of it is also that it's really a gift. It's a wedding gift that you give to your spouse. Of all the wedding gifts that you can give to your spouse, there is nothing that is more unique and personal of a gift than your own body. You know, you can buy the fanciest ring, you can buy your spouse a new car, or, you know, give them a huge dowry like some cultures do, but all those things are not unique. There's only one thing that you alone can possibly give to your spouse that is completely unique and personal. That's your own body. And if you've already given that away, then you've deprived your spouse of one of the most unique personal gifts that you can possibly give to your spouse. So, in summary, whether you are still in high school, whether you have never given thought to marriage, whether you are now looking for a spouse, whether you're already married or have been married for decades, it is always time to prepare for marriage. Why? Because what we need to prepare for marriage is really just what we need to prepare as a life given to Christ, of denying ourselves, of learning to love others, and learning to love God. And so, you know, well, I should say, there are some people who might have a gift of singleness. And there are some people who God does call, you know, to be single for the rest of their lives. In the Orthodox tradition, we actually have people who make a vow, you know, and become monks, and they promise never to marry. But even in the Protestant tradition, there are some people who are called to a life of, you know, ministry, or just for whatever reason that God gives them a life of singleness. But even if that's true, if what I just said is preparation for marriage is really just living out the Christian life, then whether you are called to a life of singleness, or God just hasn't brought you to your future mate yet, it's really the same thing, isn't it? It's just about learning to love God, love others, and of course learning to love yourself too. Any questions? Comments?
See, that's study for like cooker culture. Is that real?
Mm-hmm.
Like cooker culture, is that real?
Is it real?
It is not.
What do you mean it's not
Like they
real?
did a study and they interviewed.
No, I saw the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
That one was actually saying hookup culture is not more or less than it's ever been.
Yeah. It's
I mean,
like-
the culture is still there. I think it's just not an epidemic.
Yeah, it's not as hyped up as it. Our generation is actually.
Isn't any worse than previous generations?
Baby boomers.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
no, it was their parents.
Right.
Well, I don't know if that's saying much, because it was pretty bad, you know, when I was a kid. It was pretty bad already for many decades.
Things aren't getting worse.
Okay, that's good. Things aren't getting worse.
Yeah.
Same percentage.
More hype, same thing.
Yeah, more hype.
Well, certainly our movies and TV hype it up, right? And maybe it makes it seem that it's more prominent than it really is.
Yeah.
I just have one question. I mean, so we know that there's a leader role and there's a nurturing role. Does it have to be husband and wife?
What if you have a mom?
Can it be the wife as the leader?
That's a real good question. Now, when I say that, you know, the husband is the leader and the mother, the wife is the nurturing role, that's kind of their primary role, but I think the father has a huge responsibility to be nurturing too, and the wife has a big responsibility to be kind of a co-leader too. And so they're not like sole exclusive domains. Okay? But I do think that one is more primary than the other. And I know there are plenty of families, plenty of couples where the wife just happens to be maybe the one more extroverted, or the one who's more opinionated, a stronger personality. Maybe she's the more organized one, who's more together and with it. I think that in those instances, sure, the wife can take a leadership role in a lot of aspects of the family. Just like I think women have a very important role in business and government and society. But the husband still needs to be the spiritual leader of the family. And when the husband is not, I think the woman, as part of her leadership and nurturing role together, needs to encourage and allow the husband to do that. It's just God has given the husband to be the pastor of the family, and when he's not fulfilling that role, I think he's really abdicating a role that God has ordained. Again, that doesn't mean that he's the exclusive leader in all aspects of the family life, but especially for the spiritual part, which is really the most important part, he needs to be the leader. And then vice versa. There are some women who are just not very nurturing, who are not as, maybe don't even like kids. I think they are also abdicating their role in the family. But the husband does have a huge responsibility to nurture the kids also. I love handling my kids when they're babies, and like our boys, one of them, they wouldn't go to sleep at all unless I held them lying down on the couch on my chest till they fell asleep. And I love doing that, so I was very happy to play part of the nurturing role, but the woman still is given that dominant responsibility, and if she's not, obviously the man then would need to take on that responsibility, but I think he needs to encourage and allow the woman to do that as much as possible. Part of it is just our physiological role. The woman is the one who breastfeeds. You can't, women can't advocate, well, they can nowadays with bottle feeding, but you know how much more healthy breastfeeding is than bottle feeding. And that's part of modern science, kind of trying to take away the role of the mother, but now studies have shown that that's not as good for the kids. And I think there's a reason for that. God designed us that way.
Can we acknowledge that even though, the way, I guess, that you described it isn't, the husband bossing the wife around, that unfortunately many people who call themselves Christian in our society have interpreted it that way?
Yeah.
And acknowledge that that is a valid reason for this controversy because of how
Yeah, and we need to educate those people that that's not the proper biblical role of being the family leader. That's not what it means. And I think they're sinning when they do that. They're abusing the role that God gave them, and taking on a meaning that God doesn't want to be in them.
How do you educate someone? That's kind of
I don't know. How do you educate someone on anything? How do you tell them about Christ? It's all about us just sharing God's word in a loving, caring manner. Anything else?
I feel like what you said about the roles and stuff is like a husband can't be a leader without the wife helping him to be a leader, and the woman can't be a nurturer without the husband helping to nurture. And I feel like it's like a partnership that they need both of each other to be able to work it out. Because if the husband didn't fulfill his secondary role as a nurturer, then the family wouldn't function anyway. And if the woman didn't take her role, secondary role as a leader, then the family wouldn't function.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Think about in a church. Imagine if the pastor was the only one who was helping people to become better Christians. if the pastor was the only one who was sharing the gospel, if the pastor was the only one who was teaching. Pastor can't do all that himself, right? Every one of us has a responsibility to help nurture other people in the faith, to be Sunday school teachers, to be worship leaders, to share the gospel with others, to love others. So all of us have some of the responsibilities that the pastor has, but the pastor has that primary role. It doesn't mean that none of us have to do it. It just means that the pastor is the one who's designated as in that primary role. But we all share in those responsibilities. It's the same thing in a family. Father has primary role, mother has primary role, but we all both need to share in those responsibilities. All right. We closing word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your great love for us, and we thank you for the ways that your love is exhibited in our world. We thank you, Lord, for the gift of spousal love, and we pray, Lord, that you speak to each and every one in this room right now about their roles in their future relationships, or whether you have someone in mind for them right now, whether they're going to get married next year, 5 years, or 10 years. Lord, may you begin to work in their hearts to prepare themselves for the future spouse, so that your will be done, Lord, that each of us can be the best spouse that you want us to be, and in so doing, really just being the best Christian, the best follower of Christ that you want us to be. Teach us, Lord, to prepare our hearts by loving you, by learning to love others and loving ourselves. Thank you, Lord, for the gift of sex, that you created our bodies to be one flesh with another, and in so doing, giving us a role in your creation, that we are co-creators together with you of each new generation. Lord, we don't know what the future holds for each one of us, Lord, but you do. And we just ask that you help us to put our trust in you for our future, put our trust in you for molding our hearts to be prepared for whatever the future holds. And we thank you, Lord, that you are the great groom in our relationship with you as the church, that you are the bride and we are the bridegroom, and we are the bride. You are the groom and we are the bride. And may that relationship be a model for how we ought to live in our lives. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, we're supposed to have some home group, but I realize it's almost